The Old Vulture's Nest. The Road to Palace. Junior architect Appius Lacer had never been in such a bad mood before. All Roman gods! Just recently he thought that Mercury himself was standing behind his shoulder, giving advice and securing his way to the noblest Roman patrician society. But here he was, years later, spending the inherited gold coins from his father, bribing every last servant possible. Appius hoped Paragoros was also standing behind his shoulder. He would need some comfort after the amount of gold he spent already. "I made the right decision," he told himself. After what seemed like an eternity, Appius's luck was about to pay off. He was finally invited to a feast in the emperor's palace. The chief imperial provisor's third daughter was chosen to replace one of the Vestals, a major event. The emperor wanted to make this occasion as memorable as possible for the old servant. Of course, there were over 400 guests in there, but Appius Lacer didn't plan to waste the chance he was fighting for so furiously. The emperor should remember him. And the emperor did remember him. Sort of. First of all, the wine turned out to be not so innocent as Appius believed. Second, the soon-to-be Vestal was too young and too beautiful not to get kissed by any man before she became the priestess of Vesta for the next 30 years. At least, this is what fermented grape juice whispered to the hot head of an enthusiastic architect. The rest seemed somewhat of a blur for a moment. Despite the chaos that ensued, it looked like Mercury was on Appius's side after all. The architect wasn't killed on the spot. Servants simply pulled him through all the halls, throwing him into the mud in the backyard of the emperor's palace with one recommendation: never come back to the palace. It would take more than a bit of mud to discourage Appius. He isn't the son of his father for nothing. His father, a Hibernian fisherman who had managed to make an entire fortune selling goods to Rome in a span of a few months, this was nothing. Appius realized two more things, though. No more bribes to servants or fermented grape juice. A deadly combination, that. Instead, he should just bring something valuable enough not to just get accepted to the palace, but to get honoured as a hero. He had everything to make that happen. A few days had passed since that blurry evening, and Appius found himself idly looking out of the window, waiting for the messenger from the palace. Yes, here he was, finally. Appius met the messenger, taking the scroll and opening it with shaking hands. It was his own letter of apology, resealed with the emperor's signet. Across his text there was one single word written, enough to make Appius's heart jump for joy. Approved. Appius felt a small tear in the corner of his eye. What was this? A twinge of guilt? Whatever. Hours later, the word approved was still on his mind. Looking in the mirror, he imagined the laurel wreath on his head. Every triumph required sacrifices, and the ones he was making were no different. He would gain the old Vulture's Nest to Rome. The city gates. She came to the village in the morning, just when Marcus, as usual, was checking the posts. Small, awkward, in raggy clothes, and with a bag full of scrolls over her left shoulder. Just another beggar among tens of those that Marcus saw coming through their village daily. Previous wars with the Romans had a devastating effect on this region. Still, many people were in motion, looking for places to settle and looting whatever they might find in exchange for food. Fortunately, their village was able to sustain the war with minimal losses. A random catapult had hit the windmill, and the northern gales destroyed the wall, but that was about it. The latter made Marcus, the garrison commander, quite nervous. Pushing his nervousness aside, Marcus quickly noticed something odd about this woman with the scrolls at the gate, prompting him to get a better look at her. The first and most apparent difference was an old, sleepy hawk sitting on her right shoulder without any leash or a cap. And second, the look of determination on her face when she came towards him. "Are you the one in charge here?" the woman asked. She couldn't be that young, Marcus thought, when he noticed her at a distance. She looked in her late 20s, brown hair, long nose, and thin lips that made her face look a bit disproportional. Not the prettiest. But then again, neither was Marcus. Still, there was something odd that made her stick in his memory, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "The ruler lives in the town hall," Marcus said, looking at her with mild interest. "I do not think he has time to talk to every person who passes through our settlement, so you need to have a substantial reason to get his audience." "I don't need the audience," the woman responded. As she straightened out the shoulder strap of her bag, Marcus briefly saw the many bruises under it. The bag was apparently far too heavy for her, and she must have carried it for a very long time. "I noticed that one of the sails on your windmill is missing. This means that, most likely, you do not have a miller. If I fix it, can I settle here?" The question was so unexpected that the soldier laughed out of sheer surprise. The woman eyed Marcus patiently for his response, waiting for him to stop. He assumed she was too used to getting rejected. "Lady," Marcus said, still laughing at the impossible request, "the windmill sail is 3 times bigger than yourself, and 4 times heavier than you at that. My friend the architect already looked into it, and found it beyond repair." He thought for a moment. "Listen, I do not make such decisions, but you have my curiosity. If you manage to fix it, be our guest. I will pin a word for you to our ruler." He laughed to himself again, but stopped abruptly when he saw the woman crying. "I'm sorry, lady. It's been a rough few weeks here. Can I help you with something else?" "My name is Cora, and you didn't upset me," she replied. She smiled, and Marcus soon learned that those were tears of relief. She smiled, and Marcus soon learned that those were tears of relief. "Could you tell me the village name?" "We call this place the Old Vulture's Nest, and my name's Marcus." "The nest?" Cora laughed, and turned to her hawk, who seemed to have been attentively listening to their earlier conversation. "Did you hear that, Nennet?" she said to the hawk, walking past Marcus. "We're settling in the nest. Isn't that funny?" Nennet abruptly made a screeching sound, making Marcus jump in surprise. What a strange bird! And its owner. 3 days had passed since that strange interaction. As usual, Marcus was checking the posts, as he usually does. People were continuing to make their way into the Old Vulture's Nest. Shouts of those selling goods at the market could be heard, and rebuilding efforts gained momentum. Today was a little different from the normal, however. The windmill was working again. The Fortress. Even if the village was initially named differently, it's been forgotten for what seems like eons now. Located by the sea near the main crossroads, and inhabited mainly by fishermen and traders, the Old Vulture's Nest did not stand out in any way from tens of other seaboard Hibernian villages besides 2 things. It was known to be the oldest existing village in the whole region and had an unusually high, even though not completed, town hall. Its lengthy construction made it one of the landmarks of the territory. There was also a third thing, which not many knew about, but that was how the village got its rather bizarre name. The old ruler of this place, Plinus Lacer, was known to always sit on the balcony right under the town hall roof, looking bold and grumpy most of his ruling life. He indeed resembled a vulture, patiently waiting for his prey to draw their final gasp of air before going in for the kill. "I heard that the old vulture is on his last legs, eh?" the guard said, joining his commander going up the hill towards the town hall. "I would not bury him right now," Marcus replied. "For nearly 30 years that I live here, Plinus Lacer hasn't aged a day since I first met him. Still, it's impolite to call him Old Vulture, even if he doesn't hear it. He's a good ruler who cares about his lands." The guard nodded in agreement. Marcus smiled. His garrison was one of the most stable units on this seashore, in no small part due to the friendly and honest atmosphere that he managed to maintain with his soldiers. "The fortress is growing," the guard stated, following where his commander was looking. "They settled in only a week ago, and now it's visible without a spyglass." "It is indeed," Marcus agreed, focusing on something. "I do not want to sound scared, Commander," the guard admitted to Marcus, "but I do not trust our ruler's grandnephew. He might be a good architect. I know you grew up together. But if he is on our side, why does he build a fortress next to us instead of helping us here? The wall will probably—" "Don't remind me of the wall," Marcus said abruptly. After a short time in silence, Marcus sighed, realizing he was a bit blunt to his guard. "Yes, you are right. I need to talk again about our defence to the Old Vulture. Damn it! To Plinus Lacer." 2 architects. Every time Marcus visited the chamber where Plinus Lacer accepted his visitors, he always asked himself why the Old Vulture chose this place. Small, dusty, and dark, it could barely fit a vast wooden desk, some shelves, and a couple of chairs, maximum. The rest of the unoccupied space was crammed with scrolls, as far as the eye could see. How on earth does he categorize them? A thought best saved for a drink, or 3. "I already know what you were going to tell me," Plinus Lacer said slowly, moving his eyes from the scroll he had read to the now approaching commander. "And I'll repeat it. A war is coming to the region, and we barely have 500 soldiers here." This has been their usual argument for the past few months. "The northern part of Hibernia already fell under the attacks of the Romans," Marcus continued. "The pathfinders that were sent there didn't come back. We need a decision sooner or later, Plinus." "Tell us something new. Isn't it exactly why I built my fortress here?" Another visitor interrupted what Plinus was about to say, making Marcus more irritated. Neatly dressed in Roman clothes, handsome and refreshed, Appius Lacer was the complete opposite to Marcus. The latter recently did not sleep at all. The architect pulled piles of scrolls from another chair and sat down with the usual bored expression on his face. "So, what's your problem, Marcus?" "My problem?" Marcus exhaled and slowly counted to 10, as his mother once taught him in his childhood. "My problem is that we do not need another fortress here. We need to fix our own first. This is the oldest village in the region, and you are perfectly aware of what that means. Who cares about your new fortress? It's ours who would be attacked." "And like I told you many times, swordsman," Appius said, "it's beyond repair." At that point, Marcus was seething. He'd have to apologize to his mother at another time. "Well, architect, tell that to the woman who fixed the damn thing not 3 days ago." Appius paused his scroll reading and looked at the brawny man. "You dare to compare complex defensive fortifications to that of a primitive peasant's construction?" Marcus counted to 10, then to 20. Then 30. It didn't help. "I dare to compare you with a simple woman that repaired the mill, and frankly speaking, this comparison is not in your favour." "Enough!" The cold voice of the old vulture bellowed, stopping the argument in an instant. He turned his head to Marcus, and the commander saw the twinkles of joy in those old water-blue eyes of his. "You talk about that girl far too much recently, boy. It's making me curious. If my grandnephew can't offer us anything, then we are fine to use the last resort we have, aren't we? Bring her here, Marcus. We'll find out whether she is as good as you keep saying she is." The loud bang of the now-shut door made that decision final, but Marcus didn't care much. For the first time in months, and countless arguments with Plinus, he was finally going to sleep soundly tonight. The key to victory. Appius Lacer was so delighted that he couldn't help but talk aloud to himself. In that short moment, when his granduncle suddenly sided with those two loonies, Marcus and that peasant woman, the junior architect was scared that his plan had been threatened. The plan in question was relatively simple. He would build a fortress near the village, leaving the defence of the old Vulture at its weakest, until the Romans were close enough. Then they would strike. However, eventually this worked even better than he could have imagined. Appius was questioning whether that woman Cora was simply insane or whether she was another infiltrator of Rome. He had to admit that she was way better than himself at deceit, if the latter was true. Somehow she had single-handedly managed to persuade the old Vulture to waste tons of resources for nothing. He couldn't help but laugh out loud at the audacity of it all. In any case, this would all end soon. Whether Cora was a Roman infiltrator or not, he would not let her live long enough to find out. He did not need anyone to share his triumph of bringing Rome the key to their victory. It should be all his. In a few days, the Roman banners would be raised on the gates of the old Vulture's nest. Appius sighed. Sad that Marcus seemed to not support his plan. He was a good playfellow, not too smart, but loyal, and that's why he still wasted his time in those forsaken lands. "I made the right decision," he routinely told himself, but somehow this didn't sound as soothing as before. Suddenly, Appius saw something that made his heart sink forebodingly. A bird of prey, a hawk, was perched at his window, looking directly at him attentively, with those intelligent, wide eyes. The village of bricks. The old barn looked incredibly ugly. Whenever anyone would see it for the first time, they would usually freeze on the spot, taking a closer look at the simple household utility. Only after a while were they able to keep moving, looking back a few times to let the image sink well into their memory. There was nothing unusual per se about this barn. Well, besides a few things. The jerry-rigged wooden barn had a classic Roman portico, with two crooked clay columns at its entrance. As if that alone wasn't enough, the barn also had a tower on the roof. It was too small to serve any purpose other than to be decorative, but large enough to be noticed from a far distance. It was apparent that someone enthusiastic, yet inexperienced, worked hard to make it one of the best barns ever, and they succeeded. Somehow. By now the building had lost some of its initial beauty. Still, it was solid and looked almost the same as in Appius Lacer's childhood. Appius noticed that someone recently plastered up cracks on one of the columns. This barn was still being cared for. The architect smiled and immediately felt annoyed with himself for this nostalgic feeling. It was a mistake to choose this old road to the old Vulture. He should have taken another, one that didn't bring him one of those memories. Appius squinted, noticing another addition to the barn. An old hawk sitting atop the tower, like some weird weather vane. Oh no, not this bird again. For the past few days, that woman's strange pet, Nenet, was it, wouldn't leave him well alone, not even for half an hour. It sat at the windowsill when he went to bed. It was the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes the following day. It monitored how the architect had his breakfast, listened to his talks to the fortress workers, looked at him writing dispatches. It never came close enough to catch him, and never did anything else. It just watched him. Something was disturbing in how this bird behaved. Too silent, too focused, too attentive, too human-like. Appius shivered when he realized why he turned to this road in the first place. It was because of the hawk. Again. He had initially noticed the hawk sitting on the village gates, and instinctively chose a different path, confident their eyes didn't meet. But oh no, here it was, looking at him from the barn roof, laughing at how it set him up in this memory trap. Appius shook his head. Absurd. He should sleep more. Birds do not laugh. They do not understand human speech, and they certainly cannot set traps. Or could they? No, he snapped out of his thoughts. This bird knew nothing about him, especially not what the ugly old barn meant for him anyway. The City of Marble. The autumn brought incessant rain to the seashore of Hibernia. Grey leaden skies hung low over the choppy waters, making the place look more vivid than usual. It was almost as if all the world's colours fled from the unfriendly wildlands of Appius Lacer's homeland. Homeland. What a word. In all his life, Appius never considered this place to be his home. It was not more than a necessary temporary refuge to him, a place where he had to live part of his early life by some cruel curse of the gods. As long as Appius could remember, his true home in his mind had always been Rome. A bright, colourful, classic, fascinating city from his mother's, born Roman, stories. The city of marble behind the stone walls. Magnificent spires that pierced the heavens. Tremendous thermae with sparkling fountains and hot baths open for the ordinary public. High columns surrounding broad squares and people in shining white clothes walking along the straight-as-an-arrow streets discussing literature, music, poetry, architecture. Yes, architecture. City of the greatest. City of the masterminds. His home. His barbaric father only smirked at those stories his mother told. Sometimes when she became incredibly poetic describing Rome, he said different ones, darker ones. Stories about people being sold on a marketplace like livestock. Shady places where beggars would fight to the death for a stale meal. Clothes soaked in urine for days to get their white colour. Dirty inns where barbarian merchants could buy themselves a wife for a handful of gold coins. In the last story his father had told, his mother scowled and left the room abruptly. Appius remembered his mother was so angry she didn't talk to his father for months. It was only until his father returned from Rome, bringing her what she'd been asking him for aeons, did she change her tune with him. Precious, colourful scrolls on Roman architecture. They were worth a small fortune. Straight lines and clear forms of Roman buildings grabbed young Appius's mind and never let go. His mother was right. Rome was a fascinating city. It was inhabited by only the most extraordinary people if they could construct such breathtaking buildings. This was when Appius firmly chose, to his mother's delight and his father's disappointment, that he didn't want to be a merchant and instead wanted to become an architect, a famous Roman architect. Together with his friend Marcus, son of a garrison commander, Appius built sand fortresses on the shores. One time they even had to dismantle Marcus's father's old barn, using its parts as building materials for the fortress. Strengthened with wooden planks, the sand fortress turned out to be a true masterpiece. Sadly, though, the boys' fathers thought otherwise. To say the least, they weren't happy. The situation could have ended badly for the boys if Plinus Lacer didn't interrupt. The ruler soothed the angry fathers, suggesting what he believed to be the best punishment. So Appius, together with Marcus, was ordered to rebuild the barn, which they did. This process took them several months, plenty of arguing, and more than a few splinters. But they did, with a tower and a crooked clay Roman portico, yes. Since then, Appius considered this barn to be his first real building that he planned and constructed from scratch. And now that barn, along with the whole old Vulture's nest, was doomed to fall under Roman catapults. Not without Appius Lacer's help. I made the right decision. Did I? For the first time since his return from Rome, though, Appius was not so sure. The Chamber of Lies. His granduncle's chamber had changed drastically, and it was hard not to notice. All his ancient, dusty scrolls that had been lying around for decades now had their own place on the tidied shelves. The vast desk of the old Vulture had also been cleaned, with only a few papers remaining on it. Marcus was standing close to it, listening to an explanation being given by Cora. While strange, this wasn't the most drastic change. For as long as Appius could remember, his granduncle was an inseparable part of this room. He would always be sitting there, at his desk, reading one scroll or another. This time, however, his usual place was now occupied by a woman. Appius felt cold sweat going down his back. "Where's my Appius began to say, but didn't finish his words. He soon saw the old Vulture sitting in the armchair for the visitors, and immediately felt angry at himself for this moment of fear. He won't let that happen again. "So," Appius said, somewhat sarcastically, "I see we have a change in command, huh?" Marcus scowled at him. They hadn't spoken much since their previous argument here. "Is this now our new ruler?" Appius continued. "What should I call you, lady? Forgive me, but Cora sounds like a peasant name. I'd suggest you change it if you want to rule these lands." "A new record," Marcus responded. "Your time for insulting someone continues to improve." Appius winced at this remark. He should be a bit more friendly indeed if he wanted them to keep trusting him. "You won't believe what Cora invented, Appius," Marcus said in a far less sarcastic tone this time. "Cora, show him." Cora, who was far more interested in drawing on her scrolls than listening to childhood sarcasm between two friends, finally raised her eyes from the scroll and smiled. "I'm glad you came," she said cheerfully. "I would appreciate another architect's opinion on my latest draft." Appius sighed. "What a bore," he thought. "At least try to hide your plans, little mouse. Make me fight for this knowledge." It was too easy. They both voluntarily jumped into a trap and closed the door behind themselves. He questioned whether Cora was indeed that straightforward, or was she another, and far better, infiltrator of Rome than himself? Well, he was about to find out. With a cold air about him, Appius finally looked at the scrolls on the desk. Marcus and Cora stared at him. "What?" He quickly grabbed the scrolls, looking more attentively this time. Appius was shocked. First of all, he didn't expect this amount of precision from a peasant woman, especially one he considered to be self-educated. Second, the plan was accurate, neat and clean, using the correct dimensions. Lastly, the solution. His father could afford the best teachers, all recognizing his talent in mastering the famous Roman style. They proclaimed he would have a great future if he established contacts with the patrician society. But this? He felt jealous. This was on a whole different level. Appius was looking at the total opposite of everything he had ever been taught, and it was simply done better. Curved forms instead of straight lines, a visual simplicity that hid complex calculations. The idea of what this girl offered was crazy, impossible, and functional. He couldn't find a single fault in her draft. Her level of thinking and manipulating forms and figures was something remarkable. After a long while, staring in disbelief, Appius finally cleared his throat. Cora was looking at him, patiently waiting for his judgment. All gods of Rome! Why now? Why here? What should he tell them? The touch of the genius. This is indeed a very unorthodox vision, Appius's voice said weakly. I would need to look at this more closely. It doesn't seem like a workable solution, though, but I would need to recheck. He hated himself for that response. To his surprise, though, Cora smiled even more broadly. You talk exactly like my teacher, she replied. I still remember how he always looked at me with the same puzzled expression. But Cora, you break the very laws of logic, you know, she imitated the squeaking voice of someone. I need to recheck to see where you've made a mistake. Cora laughed. Appius looked at her in disbelief. The woman was beautiful. It was in those radiant green eyes you could see her true soul, her passion for creation, for knowledge, the hunger to learn more. Her love for the work she did turned her into an entirely different person. At this exact moment, this plain peasant woman excelled in her beauty the infamous Vestal Virgin, whose kiss brought the architect all this trouble in the first place. The architect turned his eyes, trying to get rid of this image, and noticed the stern look that the old Vulture gave him from his seated position. Plinus Lacer had this disturbing ability to tell when his grandnephew was lying. Even though Appius didn't lie to him directly, he knew that the old Vulture could see beyond his skin and bone. When will you be ready to give your answer? His granduncle said, looking straight into Appius's face. News from the north is already disturbing. Half of Hibernia has fallen under the battering of the best Roman cohorts. In a matter of weeks they will be here. What Cora is offering can allow us to keep a larger force for defence, without creating a huge amount of pressure on the citizens. Blunt as always, Appius thought. Tomorrow, he said, taking the scrolls and putting them into his bag. I will give you your answer tomorrow. His voice quivered as he spoke, making Marcus look at him with suspicion. Appius didn't care all that much, though. The Tides of Conquest. What had he done? Appius hastily walked from one wall to the other. How stupid! Who could have imagined that not Rome, the centre of all civilization, but his old home village would bring him what he had been looking for so desperately? The timing couldn't have been worse. No, the old Vulture was wrong. It wasn't a matter of weeks, but a matter of days, perhaps even hours, until the Roman armies would arrive at the village gates following his invitation and start the fight for control over this territory. And then the old Vulture's nest would be doomed. One thing Appius found out for sure: Cora couldn't be the Roman infiltrator. Not a single architect in all of Rome was able to create what she did. Her drafts didn't belong to a gifted person. Her drafts were a pure gift itself. And all of this was about to be buried under the village debris because of his betrayal. Should he offer Cora the chance to flee? This wouldn't work, he thought. She's the same type as Marcus, Appius recognized. Her mind wouldn't change. She would rather sacrifice her life for the village she recently arrived at than leave people who needed help. By the gods, this was frustrating. Yes, he did agree to pay a high price for the possibility to create, within the most glorious city ever. Who would even notice that one Hibernian village got destroyed in the process, like an old barn of Marcus's father? Heralds in Rome brought similar news by the dozen daily. No one he knew would really care. The new silk stola of the emperor's third wife got more attention than something like this. Here, however, it felt different. It felt real. A tide of shame finally whirled up in what was left of Appius's consciousness, and unexpectedly, to himself, he burst into tears. He should stop this conquest. By all means, at any cost. An impossible task. A strange sound made Appius look outside the closed window. Predictably, it was again this bird. Whatever. On a strange impulse, Appius opened the window and let the hawk fly into the room. To his surprise, the hawk carefully landed on his shoulder and gently touched his cheek with its head, wiping his tears. They met the dawn together.